Hey, do you like watching your friends do cool stuff? How about keeping your party from ever missing an attack or failing a saving throw? From the outset, my goal for this build was to create the very best support role character for my party while implementing a truly unique flavor. And what better class to use as a foundation for this than the Artificer? As a quick disclaimer, I was creating this to play in an Eberron setting, so I did end up choosing a Mark of Making Human as my race. That choice afforded me proficiency in a language in addition to Common, an important +2 to Intelligence, and a +1 to another ability score of my choice, the ability to add a d4 to an Arcana check or ability check using Artisan's Tools, proficiency with an extra set of Artisan's Tools, the Mending cantrip, the magic weapon spell without concentration for an hour once per long rest, and access to several other spells, although I didn't really use any of them. Most of what we're after here is the free Mending cantrip, since that's usually a must-have for Artificer anyway, and the ability scores going where we'd like them. So if you're trying to make something similar outside of the Eberron setting, feel free to have a look at rock gnomes, humans, or any other race if you'd like to use the custom origin rules from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Speaking of ability scores, I used point buy for this build, as I do for most of the ones I make on this channel, to try and remove some of the random nature of dice rolls, even though it's way more fun to do it that way. As is typical of Artificer, we're going to make Intelligence our highest stat with a 15, followed up by a 14 in Dexterity and a 13 in Constitution. I wanted that Dexterity to make sure we had a decent AC on this build, as well as a slight bonus to our initiative to make sure that we're getting buffs onto our allies near the start of combat. And the Constitution score really just helps us to maintain concentration on various spells while also bolstering our hit points a bit. From here, I placed a 13 in our Wisdom score, a 9 in our Charisma, and outright dumped our Strength score with an 8. This build will not be relying on Strength at all, and if we need it to, we can always rely on an infusion to get us there later. That aside, you may be surprised to see Wisdom where it is. I promise, there's a reason for that, and we'll get to it later in the build. But for now, applying our racial bonuses brings us to something like this. Now, let's take a moment to think on the character itself. In this Eberron setting, Marco Lightreaver has been tasked by House Cannith to design, build, and test implements of war. His inquisitive mind and ingenuity is up to the task. However, being the gentle soul that he is, Marco takes an interest in devices that carry a focus on keeping others alive and assisting his adventuring party. Now, of course, we'll begin this build as an Artificer, and as usual, I'll spare you many of the fine details for this class and any others I'll mention, but I'll be sure to link any of the full class guides I have on this channel in case you need them. What I do want to touch on is that beginning our build in Artificer will give us some great saving throw proficiencies in Constitution and Intelligence, as well as a proficiency in medium armor and shields, which we are sure to use at some point. You can see that I chose my skill proficiencies in Arcana and Medicine, but you can certainly choose something different if you'd prefer. I just felt that those choices were on theme for Marco. Now, before we get to our subclass at level 3, let's go over the infusions we'll probably want to pick up for this build. At level 2, we'll get to select 4 and have 2 active at any given time. Being that we're human, we'll probably want to pick up Goggles of Night just in case we need them, but the main infusions we'll want to pick up and run with at this point are Enhanced Defense and Homunculus Servant, 2 of my favorites. Feel free to fill that leftover slot with anything you might find useful, like Mind Sharpener or maybe a bag of holding if your party could use that. Now, ideally, at some point, we'll have enough gold to purchase ourselves a shield and breastplate armor. So I'll just assume that we're able to do that and infuse that shield with Enhanced Defense, so we have a total of 19 AC at this point. Marco isn't trying to tank for the party, but he definitely isn't a fan of taking damage in combat. And so now, turning the item over in his hands, Marco withdraws a pouch from his toolkit, as well as several stones inscribed with runes. He takes a moment to rub his hands vigorously and then lays down the item on a black cloth spread over his work table. After placing the runestones in precise positions, he opens the pouch, sprinkling a fine iridescent powder over the cloth while murmuring a low rhythmic chant. Taking the item reverently in his hands and uncovering it, there is no longer any sign of the powdered orichalcum, but the item glows faintly with the infused Dwemer before fading back to its normal appearance. With a subtle nod, Marco then turns his sights to the heavens and thanks our sponsor, Describe, for the eloquent verbiage I just used to illustrate this infusion process. Their service offers nearly 7,000 different finely crafted descriptions for just about anything you might need in your next D&D adventure, whether you're a DM or a player. And they've even offered a generous 10% off of your first month by following the link in the description and using the code ConstructedChaos at checkout. So thanks again to our friends over at Describe for the wonderful words as well as for sponsoring this video. Now back to the build. Once outfitted for adventure, Marco makes one last preparation by crafting a homunculus servant, aptly named Polo, to act as his proxy in battle, dealing out healing and support to his allies while also handling one other important task. At level 3, we'll choose our Artificer subclass and we're going Artillerist. This choice gives us quite a bit right off the bat, including access to spells like Shield, Shatter, Fireball, Wall of Fire, and Wall of Force. We'll also gain access to our bread and butter feature, the Eldritch Cannon. This feature represents what Marco has been tasked with creating and testing for House Cannith. Using woodcarver's tools or smith's tools, we can magically create a small or tiny cannon within 5 feet of us as an action. Either size can be completely viable depending on your build, but we'll definitely want a tiny version since the rules state that it can be held in the palm of your hand. Marco will need to be cautious, however, as this cannon can only be created for free once per long rest. After that, it'll stick around for an hour and we'll need to expend a spell slot of any level to create another one. Additionally, we can only have one cannon at a time and we can't make another one while the current cannon is present. So no endless artillery of magical bazookas for you. But we're not really interested in doing damage anyway, so although the flamethrower that does 2d8 fire damage over a 15-foot cone against a dex save for half damage, and the force ballista that makes a ranged spell attack out to 120 feet for a 5-foot shove and 2d8 force damage are tempting and fairly viable for other builds, we're most interested in the Protector Cannon. This option emits a pulse of energy that grants itself and each other creature of your choice within 10 feet of it a number of temporary hit points equal to 1d8 plus our intelligence modifier. At early levels especially, this feature is going to be extremely powerful if we know how to use it to the fullest extent. To start, the first time on an adventuring day that you feel combat may be drawing near, you'll want to summon your cannon and spam its ability until all of your allies have the maximum temporary hit point total. These hit points won't stack and they won't replace any existing hit point total that exceeds the new amount, but there's no real limit to how many times you can activate your cannon outside of combat as a bonus action, and the temporary hit points it creates won't expire until the affected creature finishes a long rest. That alone is wildly useful, but the cannon itself is a magical object and is, as such, immune to a number of spells that must target or damage a creature specifically. Generally, if the spell's description, even an AoE spell, does not list damage being done to objects, the cannon should not be affected. That being the case, all of its ability scores are neutral +0, so it may be susceptible in cases where it is forced to save against damage. Additionally, it'll have an AC of 18 and a number of hit points equal to 5 times your Artificer level, but don't forget to add in its own temporary hit points when you use its ability, as well as the cannon's immunity to poison and psychic damage. Lastly, you'll retain your ability to activate the cannon so long as you're within 60 feet of it, and it has its own 15 feet of movement speed that it can take as part of the same bonus action that you use to activate it. But we're going to do something a little different here. Our cannon is actually going to ride in the hand of our tiny homunculus servant, Polo, granting it a 30-foot flying speed and some extra defense, since our servant takes the dodge action each turn that we don't use a bonus action to command it. Now, before everyone goes wild in the comments here, let me explain. Yes, I do realize that Polo and the cannon are both tiny sized, and that you might not think that, rules as written, this is possible. But I did quite a bit of thinking this time, and I'm prepared to show my work. First, let's take a look at the definition of a tiny creature as referenced by the SRD. Tiny creatures control a 2.5 by 2.5 foot space, are 1 to 2 feet in height, and 1 to 8 pounds in weight. Most importantly, tiny creatures have their carrying capacity cut in half due to their size. So we're going to make our tiny homunculus servant 2 feet tall, 8 pounds in weight, and calculate its carrying capacity by multiplying 15 times its strength score of 4 and divide that by 2, for a total of 30 pounds. You can probably see where I'm going here, but we're going to make sure our cannon is always 1 foot in height and only 1 pound in weight. So, based on the SRD and the encumbrance rules of 5e, Polo should have no problem carrying our cannon for us. Your DM might rule this differently, but I'm just going by the book. So, ta-da! Your cannon now has a 30-foot flying speed and benefits from the dodge action each turn that the homunculus servant is holding the cannon and we don't command it to do something else. The only real downside here is that the servant doesn't move on your turn. It takes its turn in combat immediately after you. So you'll either need to think a bit ahead about where you want your cannon on the previous turn, or have the cannon use its own movement speed to crawl to where it needs to be and have your servant pick it back up afterwards. Either way, you're affording yourself quite a bit of flexibility at this point with the servant that can dole out any touch-based spells that you need it to as a reaction, and a cannon that can bolster the hit points of your allies, itself, and your servant. And all this while you use your action for other helpful spells like Fairy Fire and Cure Wounds at 3rd level and Aid and Web later on at 5th level. As you can see, I meant what I said earlier. Marco isn't much of a fighter. He's really intent on supporting his allies and keeping them alive as best he can. And to that end, we'll be using our ability score improvement at 4th level to bolster his intelligence and constitution to make us more effective with spell saves, our temporary hit points, and our concentration checks. Now, I've already mentioned that we'll get some 2nd level spell slots at 5th level, but we'll also gain an arcane firearm ability that allows us to turn a wand, staff, or rod into a focus for our spells that grants an extra d8 to one of the damage rolls of spells cast through it. We may not use that much in this build, but who knows, maybe we'll need to hurl a firebolt every now and then in a pinch. What we're really looking forward to here is our 7th level ability from the Artificer base class, Flash of Genius. I've already sung the praises of this feature a bit in my class guide, but I'll harp on it again here because it really is that good for us. When a creature we can see within 30 feet makes an ability check or saving throw, we can use our reaction to add our intelligence modifier to the roll, and we can do this a number of times equal to our intelligence modifier per long rest. So now we're able to bolster ability checks and saving throws, keep our allies protected, add to the maximum health of our party via the aid spell, and heal them when those temporary hit points run down to 0, all while knocking back our enemies with a bit of debuff and battlefield control. And that gets even better when we use our 8th level ability score improvement to max out our intelligence score for a +5 on Flash of Genius, a maximum of 13 temporary hit points from our cannon, and a 16 spell save DC at this point. Now, as it is with any multi-class build, it can be hard to know when to jump into or out of a class. I'll choose to continue with Artificer with a 20th level build in mind, but you may want to ditch the class at this point if you'd rather get the ball rolling earlier. You may even want to leave Artificer after 4th level depending on what tier of play your campaign might take place in. It can be really hard to leave before Flash of Genius comes online, but it might be worth it when you see what else we get later. Just something to keep in mind as we move along. At 9th level, we'll get an explosive cannon feature, courtesy of our Artillerist subclass. This will bolster the damage of each cannon by 1d8, but won't apply to our protector cannon, unfortunately. But it'll also allow us to detonate our cannon as an action so long as we're within 60 feet of it. This will force each creature within 20 feet to make a dexterity save for half damage against 3d8 force damage. We'll probably not use this feature unless we're in a serious pinch, but it does provide us with a bit of story motivation for switching classes, and we'll touch on that in just a moment. We'll also get Magic Item Adept from the base Artificer class at 10th level, so we'll be able to attune to more magic items and actually craft our own common and uncommon items more efficiently. But what we're really hoping to grab is the spell storing item at 11th level. Once again, this is part of our base class, but it'll allow us to store an Artificer spell of 1st or 2nd level that requires an action to cast within a simple or martial weapon or an item that we can use as a spellcasting focus. From then, a creature holding the object can take an action to produce that spell's effect, from the item using your spellcasting ability modifier. It even places the burden of concentration onto the creature wielding the item, leaving you free for other options. And this item can produce such an effect up to 2 times your intelligence modifier for a total of 10 times at this point. Under normal circumstances, one might think to store something like Enlarge, Reduce, Invisibility, or even Blur within the item, since it doesn't require attunement and your whole party might be able to pass the item around for some crazy benefits. However, with our setup, I'd suggest that we hand this item over to our Homunculus Polo. You see, Polo can take the interact with an object action if we command them with our bonus action, and having the ability to lay down multiple concentration-based spells like Fairy Fire or Web can really change the tides of a battle. After all, we're going to need to do something with our bonus action whenever our allies are still brimming with temporary hit points. Finally, we'll stick around for one more level so that we can pick up the Alert feat at 12th level. This may seem an odd choice at first, but will probably come more in handy for the support build than it would to have a higher ability score. After all, our Constitution saving throw already has a +7, and we still have the Mind Sharpener available to us if we'd like to attach that infusion to our armor just in case. Going first in combat is something Marco will certainly be keen on, as he wants to give his allies the best chance of success by bolstering their hit points if he hasn't already, or by giving them advantage on attacks against certain enemies, locking down others with difficult terrain, and maybe even hasting an ally if there's time. And on that note, let's take one more look at the infusions Marco may have in play at level 12. At this point, you may know 8 infusions and have 4 active at any given time, and you may choose to do something different, but I would hope to have active Enhanced Defense on our shield, the Winged Boots via Replicate Magic item, our Homunculus Servant, and, if possible, the Helm of Awareness. This combination will make us pretty hard to hit, give us the ability to maneuver freely in order to stay in range for our abilities, keep Polo flying around with our cannon and dishing out extra concentration spells, and gain advantage on initiative rolls with a +7 on whatever we end up with to reliably get near the top of initiative in every combat. And since 9th level, we'll have had the opportunity to pick up some 3rd level spells alongside some other useful adds. I've already mentioned Haste earlier, but you may also want to consider Revivify, Blink, and possibly even Vortex Warp, a 2nd level spell from Strixhaven, a Curriculum of Chaos. Truly, all is looking great for us here, but all good things must come to an end. During one of these intense battles, Marco's cannon detonates unexpectedly, injuring and possibly even killing some of those he aimed to protect. Beside himself with grief, he seeks out penance for the suffering he's inadvertently caused by becoming a Peace Domain Cleric. Starting at our 1st level in this class, we'll get our spellcasting up and running, but we'll want to be careful of what we pick. Our Wisdom is our spellcasting modifier here, so we'll want options that don't really rely too much on that and instead offer a static effect. So for example, if you wanted to pick up the spell Sanctuary, you might actually want to grab that from the Artificer class instead, since the spell save DC for the spell will end up being much higher that way. What you will want to consider grabbing from here, though, is Guidance, Bless, Shield of Faith, and Healing Word, just in case you need to divvy out some ranged healing in a pinch. But there's something else that we get at 1st level that completely changes what this build is capable of: Emboldening Bond. This ability allows you to form a bond between a number of willing creatures within 30 feet of you that lasts for 10 minutes or until you use Emboldening Bond again. From that point, the affected creatures can add a d4 to an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw that it makes once per turn, so long as they're within 30 feet of another bonded creature. While you can only apply this effect to a number of creatures equal to your proficiency bonus, which at this point would be a full party of 5, there's an important distinction here that makes this feature even more insane than you might think. This d4 can be applied once per turn, not once per round. This means that a bonded creature could use the bond to bolster a lower than average attack roll or ability check on their turn, and then subsequently do the same when forced to make a saving throw or ability check on another turn in that round. Congrats, you and the rest of your party now have a concentration-free way to add a d4 to pretty much any relevant dice roll in combat. Combine that with an upcasted Bless, and then you have 2d4 to add to attack rolls and saving throws specifically. And if that's not enough, you can add in Flash of Genius for a +5 on top of that for any ability check and saving throw. And all this on top of what I'd mentioned earlier, using your temporary hit points, healing capabilities, and battlefield control spells via spell storing item. But there's one more piece to this puzzle that I'll add in. However, before we get to that, you may want to consider taking one more level in Cleric. This certainly isn't essential, but it will net you the Balm of Peace Channel Divinity. As an action, this feature can potentially provide some emergency healing in the form of 2d6 plus your Wisdom modifier to every creature you move within 5 feet of on your turn. But if your campaign is nearing its end, you may want to move along before this comes online. After all, you already have several other sources of healing, and by this point, Marco may be growing restless in his stagnant pursuit of peace. Since the beginning, Marco has been a fixer, a person that found joy in proactively solving problems. And what better way to undo the damage his folly has caused than by studying the magical manipulation of time itself? And so Marco becomes a quick study of the arcane and takes his first level in Wizard. Obviously, this move is going to work well for us with our 20 intelligence score, and although we'll take a bit of a dip to our hit points, Marco prefers to work from the back of the party anyway. So starting at first level, we'll get our spellcasting online along with a nifty arcane recovery feature that'll see us regain a bit of steam on a short rest once per day when we recover a spell slot or a few later on. But the best features for us come online at second level. Yes, I said features. At second level, we'll select the Chronergy School of Magic from Explorer's Guide to Wildmount for our subclass. This will see us first gain the Chronal Shift ability, which allows us to, as a reaction, force a creature within 30 feet of us to re-roll an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw. We can only use this feature twice per long rest, but it does serve as an important last-ditch effort for when all the other boosts we're giving to our party just aren't enough. Or it can even serve as an offensive tool in combination with a spell or ability our Homunculus or party members possess. So what else are we getting here that could be just as good as rerolls on command? Temporal Awareness. This ability will add our intelligence modifier to our initiative rolls, which is pretty good on its own, but as some of you may be realizing now, that means we have a +12 to initiative and advantage on initiative rolls if we're using the Helm of Awareness. We are pretty much always going to get great placement in the initiative now, with plenty of opportunity to stack up our allies with spells and features, so yeah, this subclass is pretty perfect for what we're trying to do. And there's still even more to gain here. First, we'll get another opportunity for a feat at our 4th wizard level, and I'm going to put a vote in for Warcaster here. This will help us maintain concentration checks mainly, but we may also throw out an opportunity attack spell here and there. But if that's not really your speed, you could always choose something else. Feel free to consider the Chef feat to bump your constitution up a bit and to give your allies some more healing during short rests and another source of temporary hit points in dire situations. Or possibly even the Skill Expert feat if you feel extra skill proficiencies could prove more useful to you. Whatever you choose, you'll definitely want to look forward to our final ability in this class. At our 6th wizard level, we'll get Momentary Stasis, a feature that allows us to, as an action, magically trap a large or smaller creature within 60 feet of us in a field of chronal energy until the end of our next turn or until they take damage. Although the creature only needs to make a Constitution saving throw, this will effectively incapacitate them and reduce their speed to 0, and we can do this a number of times equal to our intelligence modifier per long rest. While not the best ability we've gained thus far, it could be helpful in locking down certain enemies to assist your party if you have nothing else to do with your action. And I mention that because there's a really good chance that you'll want to use one of your wizard spells instead. In keeping with Marco's theme of supporting our allies and not harming any creatures directly, I'll choose not to take spells like Fireball, but nothing is stopping you from doing that if you'd like to. Instead, I'll opt for spells like Shield, Counterspell, Hypnotic Pattern, and Silvery Barbs. Silvery Barbs in particular will certainly do wonders with this setup by forcing our enemies to re-roll a successful attack roll, ability check, or save, and take the lower of the two, and give advantage to one of our allies on their next attack roll, ability check, or saving throw. All of this together is going to make Marco a master of time manipulation, battlefield control, and support to the point where your allies will rarely miss on their attacks and abilities. But I often hear it said that level 20 builds can be a bit pointless, as many campaigns never reach this point. So how would I structure this in a shorter campaign? Well, as I suggested earlier, taking just 4 levels in Artificer to start, even though that means we're going to miss out on Flash of Genius and Spell Storing Item, might be the way to go. The features are fantastic for what we're trying to do here, but might not be worth the investment of levels if you don't have the time. Additionally, I'd probably move to take just 1 level in Peace Cleric from there. As I mentioned before, Emboldening Bond is the main ability that we want from this multi-class dip before moving on to just a couple levels in Chronergy Wizard, so that we can grab that bonus to initiative and the ability to reroll attacks, ability checks, and saving throws if our other features aren't enough. So there you have a perfectly viable level 7 build that would fit into most campaigns, and I'd say that Marco is online for each of those levels and able to contribute quite well to his party of adventurers, with Polo's help, of course. But what do you think of this build? While you tell me what you might have done differently down in the comments, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more awesome build videos. And until next time, go out there and make some chaos.